Hello, everybody, and welcome to the final Unnamed Bracketology podcast before we do the Selection Sunday reveal today, the selection show. We are recording live here on Selection Sunday, and we are down to really just talking about two things. That's two things that everybody wants to know about. What is the one line going to look like in the top of the bracket? And then what is the bubble going to look like? So let's start off right there, Kerry. Iowa State absolutely annihilates Houston the night after beating Baylor on a neutral court. Meanwhile, UNC runs into NC State and loses on a neutral court, their fourth quad two loss. No team has received a one seed since the net started with more than one loss against quads two, three, and four, and UNC staring at four of them. Where do you see the one line right now?
Why did you just throw that stat at me, man? I What makes that interesting is heading into Saturday, I thought if North Carolina lost to NC State, maybe we go back to Tennessee as that fourth number one seed. I wasn't even really considering Iowa State winning so convincingly against Houston. And what do you know? Tennessee only has one quad two, three, or four loss. So maybe that is a thing. First of all, this is not our final pod. We are going to do one where we make our kids pick a bracket. I think that's going to be a fun one. But yeah, I think if they were starting over right now, maybe Iowa State gets that fourth number one seed. But I think it's going to be so hard for them to scrub the Cyclones all the way up there. I actually scrubbed Iowa State. Like after Iowa State won, I was like, oh, all right, well, they're five overall now. I actually scrubbed them back down to seven just because I didn't want to, overreact too much to one game. And I think if they put Iowa State at five, they need to explain why they didn't put Iowa State at four. So that's kind of my justification for keeping them at seven, but it has become a way tougher call than we thought heading into the week. Really thought it was just going to be, whether North Carolina or Tennessee gets it.
Yeah, I agree. I was last night, about midnight, 1 a.m. I'm like, I'm all in at this point. I'm like, it's going to be Iowa State. It's going to be Iowa State. They're going to move up into strength of record to be fourth overall. UNC is going to drop a couple because they just lost a bad game to NC State. And then I started really taking a look at the different quad splits. And Iowa State has a really interesting profile. They have more Q1A games than they do Q1B games, but they have more Q1B games than they do Q2A, and they have more Q2A than they do Q2B. It's actually a very weighted profile towards the top once you look at those first two quads for Iowa State. So it's actually a really impressive 10-6 against quadrant one for Iowa State. And even their quad two record of only having one loss is better than it looks since they only played two games in quad 2B. But I think it gets back to that scrubbing thing that you talked about. At the very end of the day, one thing that I saw this morning that really caught my attention is yesterday when I'm looking at all this, I'm like, okay, they're both two have won two-thirds of their games against quadrant 1A, but Iowa State has the better wins amongst those Q1A games. And then Pitt pops up this morning as a top 40 net team. I'm like, man, if they are scrubbing this morning and they like honestly, that's almost the first thing they look at. They look at that and they go, how would they do against UNC is 5-2 against quad 1A and they're 9-3 against quad one. Why are we even having this debate? So I kind of felt like you're right. I think if they restarted the process, maybe it's different, but it's almost like being the defending champion in boxing or something, right? You're not going to lose the title
Mm-hmm.
unless somebody takes it from you. And I don't know that it was convincing enough. This is like a split decision. And I think a split decision goes to the team that already had the belt.
Yeah, I agree. That was it. I thought you were going to say defending champion for like, the Heisman or National Player of the Year, where you are inclined to go with the sexy new guy than than rather than give it to the repeat. But that boxing analogy is that's a good one. I like that. Rocco would approve of your boxing analogy. But yeah, I'm sticking with UNC as that fourth one, and it has nothing to do with me not wanting to redo my entire bracket just to make another swap, but that is a nice side effect. I didn't have to completely overhaul everything.
Kind of going through the rest of the top seeds. I think the 2 line then becomes pretty clear with, whatever order, but Iowa State, Tennessee, Arizona, and Marquette. And then the 3 line gets a little bit interesting. I think we both agree on Baylor and Creighton. Else do you have on the 3 line?
Yeah, so Baylor 9, Creighton 10, Illinois 11, and here's the surprise I promised you. I did bump Kansas up to 12.
What?
After every single time I'm talking about bracketology, I say the committee always gives Duke a higher seed than it deserves. Here I am defying my own logic and common sense, but they've just been talking so much about the McCullough and Dickinson thing. And, at the start of the week, I had Kansas at 9 overall. And then when they lost to Cincinnati, I was like, oh, nope, they're done. You got to drop to 13. It's not like any of the other, aside from Illinois, any of those other teams did anything good. I think Creighton, Kentucky, and Duke all immediately lost. Did Baylor win one game? Yeah, and then they lost to Iowa State. But yeah, I think I had Kansas a few spots ahead of Duke at the start of the week, and I like looked back at that. I was like, all right, I need to reconsider this. And Kansas's top end wins are just so damn good. If the committee is actually out here talking about McCullough and Dickinson over and over again, I think that kind of they're kind of giving us a clue as to how they're going to value them.
That's kind of the read I've had it on it too, is like, why even mention it otherwise? Unless you kind of want people to know, hey, in this thought process, let's just remember they played Cincinnati without these guys. And so if you kind of start where they came into selection week, they probably came into selection week with Kansas ahead of those teams, like you mentioned. And then they said, all right. I mean, this is just my guess on what maybe they've been thinking. They think, yeah, we thought they were gonna lose to Cincinnati. Did people not know that they were an underdog to Cincinnati? They
Yeah,
didn't have Hunter Dickinson and Kevin McCullough, but Duke was healthy, and they lost their first game. Kentucky was healthy, and they lost their first game, so if anything, the argument is even stronger, in some ways, that, like, if you had Kansas ahead, they should really be ahead because they were the ones that didn't have their full team for their game, so, I think it's a really interesting question, because we just don't know. This is more of a mystery and an injury situation than we're used to seeing. So I agree, Kansas, 12th overall for me. I think Illinois, like you said, 11th overall. And then for my 4 seeds, I have Duke, Kentucky, Auburn, and Alabama. I know there's a reason to move Auburn up. You see those metrics, and you're like, my goodness, these are some of the best metrics in the entire country. But they're still 2-7 against Quad One. We've already talked about some of these big wins. Kentucky won on Auburn's home court. That is, for me, that's a full stop. If I'm a
yeah.
committee member, I don't have to go further than that. Kentucky won on your home court and has a way better set of wins than you have. And for me, also, the head to head came into play with Kansas and Kentucky, right? Both teams have terrific wins, but Kansas won on a neutral court. It's one thing if you have a home win over a competitor, but to me, when you beat them neutral or road, that just carries a lot more weight.
Yeah, the Kentucky Auburn point really stuck with me. Like, not only did they win at Auburn, like that was the Kentucky's here now statement. They held Auburn to freaking 59 points. Like that, the committee's not going to forget that game. I think that plays a factor. So I have Duke 13 and then Kentucky, Auburn, Alabama 14 through 16. I moved Wisconsin up to 17. They're my top five, but I think even with a win over Illinois, I'm not going to change anything.
Yeah, let's just really quickly then run through just some of these seed lines just to say if there's any disagreement, not necessarily on the order, but whether you have a different team in that
Sure,
seed line.
sure.
Um, so for the 5 seeds, I have Texas Tech, BYU, Wisconsin, and San Diego State.
Yep, same.
For the 6 seeds, I have South Carolina, Florida, Utah State, and St. Mary's.
I have Nevada instead of Utah State, but we've talked about that before. I understand your point about the regular season title mattering. I do think Nevada has the better overall profile, and I think of all the things that a coach has said in a post-game press conference, the one that stuck with me was Steve Alford saying, "Well, if we had played Utah State twice, we beat them once. Maybe it would have been different if the schedule hadn't worked out that way." I just kind of lean towards Nevada and their 6 Q1 wins, but and Utah State's not that good predictive metrics, but I'm not going to quibble. One of those Mountain West teams is a six, the other is a seven.
Yeah, this one for me is more of a gut feeling where I think the committee will just basically say, if we're gonna have the Mountain West have 6 teams in the bracket, shouldn't the champion have a pretty good seed? And I think if you put them as a 7 seed, it kind of is almost like that also almost becomes a talking point for other people. "Oh, their champion's a 7 seed, and you chose 6 teams from the Mountain West, whereas maybe possibly the Big East gets 3?" That could become does the committee even wanna talk about that? So I think there's maybe something to be said for Utah State, by just virtue of winning the conference being up there.
Well, and
7
then
seeds I do
in addition to that, the if the regular season champ is a seven seed, and then you're going to have the conference tournament champ as either a nine or a 10 seed, most likely in New Mexico. Yeah, that is the optics are going to be weird if the Mountain West gets, as I expect, twice as many teams as the Big East.
It's hard to fathom, but it's the way it breaks out. For 7 seeds, I have that Nevada team, Gonzaga, Clemson, and Washington State. I actually had Boise State. I had Boise State, Nebraska, and then Washington State in order. And I didn't punish Nebraska for a loss, but them losing was just enough to bump them down one overall seed line one spot on the overall seed list. And then when that happened, Washington State moved up, replacing Nebraska for that. And then I got to the head to head comparison between Boise State and Washington State. So Washington State, despite not playing, actually moved up 2 spots for me into a new seed line just because Nebraska lost to Illinois.
It's funny as I went the opposite way. Right? I had Washington State like on the brink of a five seed before they lost to Colorado, scrubbed them down to a six after that loss, and now I have them as a seven. Like I actually dropped them a couple of spots. Just their when I had them almost as a five, my primary rationale was those two wins over Arizona were going to hold a lot of weight. But man, you just look at that overall profile, and it's not good if you take out the. I mean, they're convincingly in. No way are they in the bubble, but what are they? 44 in net, 42 in the predictive, 35 resume average. Like that's around 40 average. Like that should be a 10 seed. So I think even having them as a seven is considerably factoring in the two wins over Arizona. But I agree. Nevada slash Utah State, and then Gonzaga, Clemson, and Washington State as the sevens.
Yeah, I do think that for me, that's one of the trickiest spots in this bracket is who's that final 7 seed because I could see the committee going a few different ways there. I have Boise State, Nebraska, Dayton, and Texas as my 8 seeds.
Yep, same.
A
I think
lot
I
of
have
people are talking about Dayton being out of the field, and I just do not see that at all.
no
I
eight,
personally don't.
18, 18.5 resume average, no chance in hell. And they might get dinged in seeding, since if St. John's is out, they don't have a single win over the field. I guess at this point they've probably beaten an auto bid. I don't know. I haven't been been updating that, but actually they do. There's some auto bid that I have on my list. They beat Longwood, so you have that. Okay, good job, Dayton. Um, but yeah, I have them as an eight, and I dropped. They were my bottom seven headed into the week, so I had them at 28. And then when they lost to Duquesne, I like freaked out and dropped them to 33. And then I was comparing Dayton to Northwestern this morning. I was like, Northwestern's got to be penalized for some of this crap they did. I know they beat Purdue, and they took Purdue to overtime in Mackey, but the non-conference strength of schedule, the way worse than Dayton metrics across the board. I ended up on the Flyers being my final eight.
Yeah, I basically got to the point where I was like, with those resume metrics where they are, I'm going to put them as close to the predictives as I can, where I just feel like the teams below them haven't done anything else that deserve to move up. And I got to Texas and was like, yeah, Texas shouldn't be above Dayton for me. So it's kind of where I stopped. 9 seeds, Mississippi State over Northwestern, head to head result there. And then TCU, New Mexico, rounding out the nines.
I have the same nines. Thank you for pointing out that head to head. I actually had to move things around because of that. Uh, or no, it was the Dayton Northwestern head to head. I had to update my bracket for that. I didn't realize I had Dayton facing Northwestern for like an entire day in my bracket. Nobody told me. This is ridiculous. But yeah, I actually have Northwestern exactly one spot ahead of Mississippi State. I might have to reassess that for banner brackets, but those are my nines as well. Yeah. TCU, Northwestern, Mississippi State, New Mexico.
And this is where it gets really fun Now we're
Yep.
down to talking about the 10 line, which usually means the spots above the real true bubble. But right now, this is the absolute heart of the bubble. And let's be clear, some of those teams we talked about as 8 and 9 seeds are not entirely safe.
Yeah.
Normally, you would think 8 and 9 seeds are totally safe on Selection Sunday, but because of all the bid stealers that have happened this week, they are not safe. So do not be shocked if one of those teams we just talked about as an 8 or a 9 seed is out. Would it be surprising? Yes. Would it be a shocker? Absolutely not. Like, do not think your teams are safe if they're on those lines right now. But the true heart of the bubble begins here. Let's start with your first two teams that are out of Dayton. Who do you have out of Dayton on the 10 line?
Uh, God, I gotta figure this out. Texas A&M and Colorado State, uh, who have very similar metrics. Obviously, I've been all in on A&M. I had A&M as a 10. I still have them as a 10. I think a lot of people have joined me in projecting them for a 10 after the little run they went on there in the SEC tournament, which historically the SEC tournament never matters, which is why I was reluctant to promote Florida to a 6. But I think A&M did enough. They now have 7 quad 1 wins, 3 of them against the top half of quad 1. If they're scrubbing this morning, that win over or the loss to Memphis is now a Q2 loss, doesn't look as bad. So yeah, at the beginning of the week they were 2-4 against quad 3. Then when we did our pod 2 days ago, they were 2-5 against quad 3. Now they're back to 2-4 against quad 3. This is why the quadrants people hate them, but whatever. It's the easiest way to quickly look at resumes.
Yep. I think for me, Colorado State, having that win over Creighton being so convincing just gets them a little bit above the first four fray, but also not a ton to love on that resume. It's not as nice as you might think if you just look at the quad splits. So I have Colorado State, then I have Colorado, both of the Rocky Mountain State teams, just avoiding a trip to Dayton, and then for Dayton. I have FAU versus Michigan State. What a fun first four game that would be. I'm sure the networks would love to have that one. And then the other one I have is two kind of big fan bases from the Southwest, old Big 12 rivals and soon to be SEC rivals. Crazy to think about that. Texas A&M and Oklahoma. Oklahoma is my last team in the field. Uh, I don't even love having them there, but at the same time, they just haven't done really anything bad. You look at
Yeah.
everybody around there, and everybody has something bad. Oklahoma's out here saying, like, hey guys, it was hard to win games in quad one. Did you see the teams we played in quad one? The fact that we beat Iowa State and BYU should probably be enough to get us in when you combine it with that Providence win in the non-conference. And I do think that Providence win out of conference and the win over Iowa could be game changers for their resume.
Yeah. I mean, we agree on the Boolean result of teams in and out. The exact order is a little bit different. I have Oklahoma at the top of my first four, so they're my fourth to last in. I guess I kind of said that wrong, but you know what I mean. They're going to Dayton, and I agree. It's because they don't have a loss outside of quad 1. I know they're 4-12 against that group, but when we're looking at, you know, St. John's would have the worst resume metrics ever to get in that large bid. Pitt would have the worst non-conference schedule ever to get in that large bid. What else? Virginia just sucks and nobody wants to see them in the tournament. Uh, Providence 5-11 in its last 16 games against non Georgetown and DePaul teams since getting Hopkins. But like I just feel like there's Oklahoma's the cleanest of the options. So I landed on them. Actually, they're my third to last in. Having Drake and the 10 seeds and all this stuff is messing me up. So I have Colorado as my fourth to last in, Oklahoma third to last, and then Michigan State and Florida Atlantic as the final play-in game. Looking at Florida Atlantic and Indiana State, though, this morning, if FAU actually is that close to the bubble, if they're still scrubbing, man, I could see the trees getting in and the owls getting left out. But I'm so reluctant to change because I think FAU was pretty comfortably in. I mean, not very comfortably. I had them as a 10 seed yesterday, but I think the committee had already decided they were a tournament team. maybe in that, 3 hour window between when they lost and when the bubble shrank 2 spots with NC State and Oregon winning, they had already scrubbed FAU down to the next to last or last team in, and then that pushed them out. But I think they just kind of scrubbed them down to the bottom this morning, and they're not going to change it.
I think with the Arizona neutral court win and then the neutral court win over Texas A&M, it's just enough. If you look at what they did against quads 1 and 2, it's 10-5. It's just for me it's kind of hard to tell a team that's 500 against quad 1 and is 10-5 against quads 1 and 2 that they're out in that scenario. I think FAU has done enough. So speaking of the teams that are out, my first four out of the field are Seton Hall, Virginia, who looked pretty comfortably in earlier in
Right?
the week. Uh, and then Indiana State, St. John's, and I'll throw one more at you. Providence is my fifth team out, and Pittsburgh's my sixth team out. So I guess two more at you. But those teams were it looked like they were maybe getting into the field, and now they don't look like they're getting close to the field because of how much it shrank. What about you?
Yeah, I have the same exact six, different order. St. John's is my first team out, then Virginia, then Indiana State, Providence, Pitt, and Seton Hall. I mean, they might put Indiana State at the top. They might put Indiana State at the bottom. I don't know. I think if it had come down to, if Indiana State was the third team out, I think maybe that is enough for them to get in. Like I feel like they would have been promoted above where they actually land on the seed list if it comes down to a last second decision. But yeah, those are my six as well. I'm like looking through all the other teams, trying to think of who is going to be that shocker, who's going to be this year's Tulsa. Uh, does App State have a chance? I don't know.
I mean, that's it. We're so far out from the teams that I think could even be a shocker at this point because of how far the bubble shrank. Like everybody that we're talking about, that could realistically get in, I think has been a team that was seriously discussed this week. So it's just a little bit different scenario. Providence would be my call. If there's a team that's like really kind of out of left field, it would be Providence. But again, they're like five out, so it's not like
Yeah,
truly out
I
of
don't
nowhere.
even. They have six quad one wins. They were on the bubble all week. I don't think that's really out of left field. So
Yeah.
yeah, I agree. The bubble shrunk so much that even if there was that, Tulsa team from whatever that was, 2016, sitting out there they're done at this point. Like I actually thought if Oregon had lost last night, there still might have been a case for them getting an at large. Um, Based on the win over Arizona and just like I have now have Oregon above um Michigan State and Florida Atlantic. I didn't quite move them up enough that I now have both 11 seeds as playing games. Like this is so messy, man. I'm glad we're doing the overall seed thing for banner brackets because I'm going to get penalized for having one of my play-in games as a 10 and the other as an 11. I'm going to lose some payment score points there, but yeah, I'm not comfortable with anything on the bubble. I mean, I never am, but God, I'm really not this year.
Before we close out, let's do a couple of things. First off, let's do one team in the bracket that's not on your 10 line, so a 9 or 8 seed that you think could miss the field. And then let's go over a couple questions from Twitter.
It's definitely Northwestern. Uh, I have what do I have them at? 34 overall, which normally is an absolute lock at this point. This is why I was so reluctant to lock in Nebraska and Northwestern and Colorado State and all these teams, just in case there was bubble carnage, bid thief carnage, I should say. But yeah, again, they have that horrible home loss to Chicago State. They're 53 in the net now. Their predictives going cross-eyed 42.5, not bad. Resume metrics 35, again, not bad. Probably is enough to keep them in, but Virginia is like 34 in the predictive or the resume metrics, and we have them out now. So I have Northwestern in. Wouldn't shock me if they're out.
I'll say TCU. Terrible
Mm.
non-conference the schedule. A team that we thought might be really headed for the bubble if they didn't beat Oklahoma. So, did that win over Oklahoma really make them that secure? Who knows? Let's move on to some questions from Twitter. Mr. Skurs asks us If Duquesne wins the A10, does this in any way boost Nebraska from, say, maybe 31 overall to 30 overall on the seed list?
Why? I don't even did Nebraska beat Duquesne? I don't know.
Yeah. I think
I
the answer to this is the committee will not at all consider that.
No. The only
We have
thing that's changing today is the 12 and 13 seed lines if UAB, VCU, or Yale loses.
like, I get the idea of basically being like, "Well, that's an extra win against the field," but I don't think the committee would give any recognition to even if it was a team that was much better, than Duquesne, picking up a big win, I don't think it would have, any difference there. And then, is Dayton in any danger of missing the field? Their best wins are St. John's and Cincinnati. I think the Flyers are out, says Nick, Mittenswell. Mittens, why? Sorry if I mispronounced that.
I No, Dayton, their metrics are too good. We already talked about that earlier. I think what 18 and a half resume metrics. I know that 57 and a half is the worst to get in. I'm not sure what the best is to get left out, but I cannot possibly imagine a top 20 resume metrics team is going to be left out.
Yep. Well, that's all we've got. We're going to get furiously working on our brackets because we need to finalize those. But thank you, everybody, for listening in all year before Selection Sunday. Like Kerry said, we'll come back for another episode where we make some cool picks with kids. And let's go ahead and wrap it up. And good luck to your team here on Selection Sunday.
We got to do one last version of family time for old time's sake. But yep, thanks. We'll see you probably Tuesday or Wednesday or whenever we have free time again.